Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, they haven't been updated.
Who was it? Who was it? Yeah, that one there. Angela, yes, it is Angela.
She's in Brisbane.
Yeah, because the date that they're giving us is the 7 o'clock on Monday, and I've got a 6 to 8
Right.
on the other side of the city, so I won't be able to make it.
So what was that on?
So it's just about training for chairs and deputies. I don't know what it was. Or maybe ask Henry. Would Henry know?
Yeah, mate.
Yeah, the training. I can't remember. Yeah, so it's not mandatory training. It's just if you want to know whether you're I think you've been through that. So I'll just decline that as well. It's not mandatory training. It's just normally more than coming into something like developing, maybe sharing it, and then they're doing it. So.
You did correct me.
What was it? And 16. Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Audit Committee of Council. We'd like to acknowledge this land we meet on today is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. And I think we have everyone in attendance today. No apologies. No leave of absence, no non-attendance. Okay, declarations of interest in relation to the papers that we have before us. Any items or agenda items that need to be declared? Nope. Okay. Confirmation of our minutes from the last meeting, the 14th of May. Someone to, thanks Karen, seconded. All in favour? Okay, carried. And business arising from those minutes, I think, are captured within today's agendas. So we can go straight into the officer reports, the first one being the internal audit work plan. Paul?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. This is obviously further to the presentation from Bentley's that we've just had. Just really noting for the committee's benefit in terms of the awarding of the plan to Bentley's and the process that was undertaken therein, but also referencing, Mr. Chairman, the internal framework review that the LGRS has developed and was seeking pilot councils to participate in. We put our hand up to participate in this program, as noted in the report. In doing so, we are actually saving the $12,000 cost, but nonetheless saw it as a worthwhile project to be a part of. And we've just highlighted on page 5 of 37 the scope of the review, predominantly being financial operations, human resourcing and procurement. But I'd invite Nathan if you want to add anything further from your perspective with the review that will be undertaken.
Thank you. It should be fairly straightforward. 2 other councils have gone before us and are currently undertaking it this month. We'll be starting ours next month. We've already determined who they want to, who the auditors would like to speak to and what documents they would like copies of beforehand to do desktop exercising. So Sue Tobin and myself are starting on that next week to organise meetings, and yeah, we'll see how this goes.
So Nathan, who are the other 2 councils? Do you know who they are?
Not off the top of my head. No,
okay.
Sorry.
Any questions on this report? Can I just, oh, sorry, Karen. Yeah. Well, what I wanted to just ask was around the actual whole Bentley's appointment. I mean, again, we've got 1 or 2 paragraphs here. I mean, I'd like to know, so are they just building the plan, or have they been appointed as the internal auditors to do work for the council?
So the request for proposal that went out was to develop a 2 or 3 year internal audit plan with an added option to carry out the assessments as well. So to start off, we will get what the plan looks like, what is the scope of the projects that will be involved. We'll also be looking at whether we can do it co-sourcing, outsourcing or insourcing those projects, those assessments. And then once we have an idea of the dollar values, but also what we can do in-house, then that will be going back to the executive and this audit committee to then say, yep, we're happy to do these straight away, or no, let's do this, or yeah, to look at the orders and the costings.
Well, it wasn't, but I'll also go on part of it, because one of the things I want to, again, I haven't seen the final audit budget as well. I mean, I don't know whether we've actually approved an audit budget to, yeah, but that's just to build the plan. So what we're saying is that then you're going to be having, you know, they're talking at 2 to 3 years, that let's just say 3 reviews per year. You might be looking at 15, another 45, maybe another $90,000. And my question is, has that been budgeted for? Because it's no use having a plan and you haven't got the budget to actually go out and do the audits. So, and are they expecting to get those other audits? Is that what they're, so when they bid to do the plan, do they think, well, we'll also pick up to do the audits? I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, through the chair, what Bentleys have obviously, the proposition they put forward was, as Nathan said, was just to develop the internal audit work plan, but we specifically referenced that there could be the capacity for them to undertake some of the projects within that work plan. But I would suspect that would, the catalyst there would be dependent on the nature of the work plan developed and the nature of the projects falling out of the plan in terms of whether they warranted an independent set of eyes or they could be done co-sourced or in-sourced, as David mentioned.
Sorry, Di first.
I thought we'd already approved to have an internal auditor, to have somebody work for 9 months, or I can't remember now, but for a period in council, and that's already been put through and budgeted for.
Correct.
So why do we need another internal audit?
Well, if I can answer that, Di. So again, the comment that I made to David is that they might do a review of, let's just say the one that Peter raised, which is around about cyber security. Your internal auditor that you've got for 9 months might not have the faintest idea how to do a cyber security review. So you wouldn't put that and say, here's some objectives, go and test it. You'll get a review that means nothing. You know, there could be one on, you know, on leadership. You know, are they trained in leadership analysis and all these different areas? So that's why my very key point to Bentley's is when they bring this plan back and they're going to have a call, whether it's going to be in-sourced, outsourced, or what they call the co-source model. So it'll be them, some resources for them, plus the internal audit resources from council. So I'll be interested to see that plan when it does come out. So, Karen?
Just note on page 6 that there's no dollar value to the work that's being undertaken, and there's no budget for it in the 2021 budget. So what figure are we looking at? What's an average figure of an internal audit work plan? And, you know, why haven't we got any money in the budget for next year?
Through the chair, I can clarify that. The Mayor, in relation to the 1920 budget, we've covered the cost of Bentley's actually doing the internal audit work plan, which they've been engaged for. What has been referenced on page, what's been referenced on page 6 in terms of the dollars we don't have at the moment is in terms of them or any other firm externally doing various elements out of that work plan. So the cost of Bentley's developing the work plan has been covered. Yeah. Yeah. Well, through the chair, well, certainly, obviously, Bentley's will do the work plan, and then there'll certainly very much be the intent to obviously roll that out over the 2 to 3 year program. But until we see that work plan in terms of whether there's the items there are in-sourced, co-sourced or outsourced, I think until we actually see that work plan, would then need to make a judgment in that regard in terms of how the funding is proposed. And Councillor Fraser, just further to what you said, just to clarify, in terms of a internal audit function, that is an ongoing role as part of Nathan's sort of revised position, because Nathan does have a auditing background through WHS, which we felt would be a good segue in this space. It's not a full-time capacity, but nonetheless, we now do have a designated internal audit function within staff.
Can I follow? Yeah.
Just back to the work that will come out of the work plan, other councils would have done this work. I know it's happening in other councils, so they would also know the ballpark figure of how much they're spending. So is it not possible to get some form of guesstimate that we can incorporate into our budget and at least be semi-prepared? Because to bring up, you know, whatever it is, $50,000, $100,000, whatever it is, into a quarter budget review, I've never been a fan of doing that. I'd rather have a year budget set out where you've covered off on all bases as best you can, rather than having nothing and then coming up and going, oh, by the way, you know, I mean, that's what quarterly budget reviews are there for. But we know that this work will be coming, And so I asked the question, you know, what are other councils doing? How much are they charged? How much are they paying?
Through the chair, Mayor, look, I think given, obviously we haven't adopted the budget yet for 2021, it could be, council could obviously consider allocating funding within 2021 budget for the work plan. And in the meantime, we can certainly give consideration to what other councils' experiences have been in this space. In terms of the dollar value, look, it really just depends on how many projects out of the work plan that the committee would determine would warrant an independent set of eyes and the nature of that work. So that could be 10,000, could be 20,000. It really just is in the nature of the project.
Hang on, we've got Nathan wants to say something.
So within the request for proposal that Bentley's put forward, they have given a project-based cost of a audit, depending if it's transactional based or strategic line, and they've estimated between $10,000 to $12,000 per project that is done. There were some other auditors that quoted 7, but we also looked at their methodology and found that it was somewhat lacking. So that was one of the reasons why we did choose Bentley, because their methodology, the way they analysed was excellent. And then we also did talking to other councils about how they found their work ethic, their response rate with queries was very good. So yeah, you're looking around 10 to 12 per project.
And it could be even more again. So I agree with what Paul's saying, that so if you're going to do a strategic audit, you're going to bring in partners and people that are going to be overseeing and reviewing that. So if you work on a $15,000, and as I said to David, one strategic, one operational, one compliance, you're looking at $45,000 a year minimum to start the ball rolling after this plan's developed. Henry?
Yeah, through the chair, it may well be, given the timing of this discussion, that if we do have a resolution from this committee, which then goes to council, that flags the need to allocate funding in the draft budget for 2021, then that can be provided for in the context of council's deliberations or the budget in the next number of weeks, week or month. But appreciate the feedback, and it was a good comment.
So
The motion with a part 2 that consideration be given in the 2020-21 budget deliberations to incorporate recommendations from the internal audit work plan once it is developed, or words to that effect.
do we need to put an amount, Karen?
Well, I haven't been given an amount,
Yeah.
and I'm not prepared to guess. I'm happy to take advice from the independent members.
Well, I think, again, given that Bentley's have said that they're estimating anywhere between 10 and 12, but again, I also don't want them to think that they are going to get all the audits as well, because that,
No,
yeah. So,
consideration be given in the 2021 budget deliberations to incorporate action that will
require an internal audit budget, or
action that will be generated as a result of the soon to be, because we haven't developed the work plan yet, have we? Soon to be developed internal work plan. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Incorporate potential act, or just incorporate actions that may be generated. Consideration be given to incorporate a
provision.
budget line.
Or a provision, yeah. That may be.
Yes, in order to respond to the soon to be developed. In order to respond to the soon to be developed. That's actually better.
Yep.
And so Kate, get rid of, yeah.
Yep.
To the soon to be, to incorporate a budget provision,
A budget provision, yep.
a budget amount or budget provision. I don't think it matters really.
Yeah.
No. It
To
just gives us
respond to the
capacity
yep.
to consider that when it comes back, because it'll come back after, it's gone out for public consultation now. We could argue this is a bit of feedback from the committee.
Yep.
Yeah, to incorporate a budget provision. Is that broad? That's a budget provision as advised by staff. What do you think?
Yep.
And to respond, and in response to the soon to be developed.
Yep.
How about that?
In response, yep.
In response
To the soon. So
So
as
just change
advised by staff
respond
and
to
in
response.
response to the soon to be developed.
Yeah, yeah,
That's it.
I think that's it.
Yep. Beautiful.
So I'm happy to move that.
Thank you. Somebody to second it. Thanks, Peter. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Di. Yeah.
How long will it take for the work plan to be
Done.
Nathan?
6 weeks. So we met with them last week. We had a meeting. We organised for this meeting to occur today. This Wednesday, they're meeting with the executive team. I've provided all of them of the information that they requested from our strategic operational projects, from the project management framework, authority upgrade, online timesheets, etc. They said that they'll be analysing that over the next 2 weeks. They may be requesting follow-up information, but they're expecting this process to move fairly quickly. They don't like to dilly-dally.
And just before I do take to the votes, we've got to move a second. Nathan, can we actually have the Bentley's proposal be circulated to the committee members? Because I'd really like to know where they're coming from, so that when we do see the work plan and if we need to ask further questions, so that can be done as an action item. Thanks. So moves. Yep.
Leave it? Okay. Sorry, I'm not procurement based, but is there anything around not going out to the public with a proposal put through for a tender, or I'm trying to think of the exact wordings on that one. Sorry.
With the chair, it's more than appropriate that the committee receive the document. We'll just have to circulate it commercial in confidence. Yep. So it can't otherwise be circulated to anybody else.
Yep. Fair enough. Yep. No, I expect that as well. Okay, so moved, seconded. So all in favour of that? Paul, yep, thank you. Thank you for a good start to get the internal audits happening. Okay. Second agenda item is the internal controls review report. Tony, sorry. Yep. Unless he wants it taken as read. Yours. Yep, you're on.
Okay. Once again, we've undertaken a review of our internal controls for the 1920 financial year. And I guess there are a couple of ways of looking at the results. One, to take a more macro view, and also, on the other hand, to look at the results, the detailed results of the review. So looking at it from an overall point of view, our results are very similar to the past years. The results in the table that are included in the report suggest that our controls are in very good shape. And it's not only looking at it in a one-year snapshot. If we look at it over a period of years, the results are very consistent. So that suggests to me that we've been applying the controls well for a number of years. So I think we can be content in the view that our internal controls are operating well. Looking at the results at a control level in detail, I think also in testing 261 controls, we only had a need to implement plans, improvement plans for 8 controls. That's higher than what we've needed to do in the last few years, but there are some reasons for that as explained in the report, and we always seem to come back to the issue of procurement. That's been a problem for us, if we want to call it a problem, for quite a while, and we seem to be in seeking improvements and in seeking perfection, we've changed our systems. So in this current year, the 1920 that we're talking about, we lost our team leader, property and procurement. And as a result of that, we took the opportunity to review the role, and we decided to split that role into 2, acknowledging on the one hand that the workload was significant, but also we needed to make sure that we were able to achieve the outcomes that we needed to achieve. So that the reason for splitting that role was to improve the functionality of the procurement process. Not only, so that was the major area. The other area of project management has also this year undergone a massive improvement in the way that we've developed that framework. So I think whilst we haven't performed as well in that area this year, I think the work that we've done will certainly see an improvement in the results next year. But, you know, I take comfort from the fact that, you know, yes, whilst we've still got these issues to address, and we will certainly work to address those concerns, the overall score of 4.8 out of 5 is extremely high. We might say, well, that's an internal review and maybe those results are not accurate, but the good thing is that our new auditors, Galpins, our external auditors, Galpins, have actually undertaken their own internal controls review, and the results, whilst they tested 100 controls, they found that 86 were effective. So we're not talking a great difference between our results and the independent results from Galpins. The only thing I would say is, whilst there's a little bit of difference, the one thing is that they are new, and I don't think we really had an opportunity to sit down with them and go through their findings, because I think if we had done that in more detail, I think their score would have been higher. But I think that's a first step on their part. But what I'm trying to say is that it vindicates the work that we have done. So it's not as if we have sort of inflated our values. I think we're being realistic, and I think we can accept the results for what they are. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Karen?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. It's always a lot of work, but it's actually good to see it, to see what the controls are and what they're checking for. Just got a question around rate revenue, and I know we've got an agenda item coming up where people who aren't paying their rates, or it's gone up by 54% or something like that. And I'm just wondering where because in the report it says that there's been a sense of not contacting people because of COVID-19, and there's been an assumption made that maybe that's the reason they're not paying their rates, and it could be. So within here, where in here are the internal controls that cover that? Because I looked through and I could see some around debtor management. It's just that they're all being given a 5, and if that is incorporating rate collection, that's probably not a 5 at the moment. So whereabouts in the internal controls does it cover off on that activity?
Yep.
Tony, I'll just make an initial comment. Mayor, in relation to data management relative to rates, obviously that's where our main revenue is sourced from. That's very much informed, I think it's noted in the upcoming report, through our debtor management policy, which prescribes the action that we'll take to collect rates. Well, that internal controls is very much informed by the policy, because that stipulates what actions we will take. And bearing in mind, obviously, in relation to COVID-19, there was the decision back in April by council to essentially allow people to defer their payments without penalty for a period of 6 months. And so there has been, I think, just under 100 people who have taken up that option in writing, but nonetheless, what the figures are showing is that there's clearly other people out there who are struggling to pay. But we've been, as an administration, we've been very clear just during this time of COVID to essentially act in accordance with that resolution, that we're not sort of pursuing debtors, outstanding rate debtors, as rigorously as we otherwise would be, if we weren't in the COVID environment. And but we are nonetheless, members, always encouraging ratepayers to enter into payment arrangements. And you'll note in I think the last report, there has been a considerable spike with people entering into payment arrangements. So we are wherever possible endeavouring to collect the outstanding rates, but ourselves, like a lot of other councils, have during this period essentially resolved not to, for example, not to undertake pursue sale of properties for non-payment rates, which we otherwise were sort of planning to do, but had to park that for the time being. Karen?
Yeah, thank you. My point was that I guess processes still have to be in place. And a couple of years ago, we actually put in an extra resource for that very reason, to collect rates. There was an extra resource, as I recall, put in place specifically around supporting people who perhaps were struggling, providing them with support, but also making sure that wherever we can, we collect rates. So there's always some people that choose not to pay rates. Certainly there'd be a group, but I'm a bit concerned after reading that report later in the agenda that we actually are making an assumption, and perhaps we need to be quite clear that we've got that right, and that people are indeed in hardship, because if they're not, then they should be paying rates. And that allows us to provide that relief for people who can't pay. And so again, my view would be there should be an internal control. Yes, we've got a policy, but the whole point of internal controls is to test out policies.
Well, and there is one. Okay.
And so I'm just checking, because I saw one with, but it says it's 5.
It says here, right? So there's one here. Ensure that rates are collected in a timely manner and overdue rates are followed up.
And that's
the
5.
Control is detailed collection procedures have been prepared and are followed continuously. So that's the control.
Yeah, and what's the score?
5.
5. It's 5 out of 5.
Yep.
But we're 58%, 57% worse than we were last year.
But that's because I think they're saying now that the policy's changed with this allowing people to hold back, and so yeah. So
I guess my point is we aren't following those people up, so we actually don't know. Probably is the case, but we haven't actually proven that because we're not following them up.
So is that recorded though, Tony? So when you all do the follow-up, is that being recorded that someone's not paid and we're now recording it, made contact, 10th of March and then again, and is that, that's...
Mayor, just to clarify, yes, if whenever an approach is made, we document that on their property file, their assessment record, in terms of the contact made. To further clarify, in terms of the deferral period, stretches from April to September. So what I'd be assuming would then be doing is post that end of September period, would then be reverting back to our normal collection process and touching base with the various ratepayers we need to then obviously glean from them, well, what is their financial position, and collect the outstanding rates on that basis, using the policy and the processes embedded in that policy. But just during the time of the deferral period, without any financial penalties with fines or interest, there's various elements that we haven't been pursuing, clearly in relation to sale of properties for non-payment of rates, because that was one area we were particularly keen not to pursue just for this juncture, for the 6-month deferral period.
Thanks. Di?
Karen's trying to say is that these people should be, that they should be contacted. And if it is because of COVID, well, then we follow the policy. If it's, and they follow whatever they have to do as well. But if it's not because of COVID and they can't prove it, well, then they should be paying it. Yep. So we should be pursuing it. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yep.
Yeah. So we shouldn't be letting them off until September. We should be following up on that.
Yep. And I think the other part, I know we're going to come to, but the other area is that even for the people that are saying, my job's been lost and I need some relief, I know that in member associations where if you're unemployed, they say, we're going to give you your membership fee for the next 12 months. But in that 12 months, if you get employment, we want you to pay your membership back. So it doesn't mean that you're going to get 12 months. So I mean, I could lose my job in January, get a job in February, and I don't pay my membership fee for, and that amounts to $700-800 for some of these CPA and AICDs. But what I'm saying though, is specified in the actual writing. We are giving you relief, but please note, if your situation changes, you need to now start paying. And I don't know if that's written into all of your, because that's what you're really saying. I mean, if their situation has improved, why should they get relief for the whole year? Why? I don't think that's fair, because there are other people that are going to be unemployed maybe for 2 years. And whatever they're paying you back, you can give it to that second year. So, I don't know what the actual wording is when you're taking this rate relief out.
What I'm concerned about is how long some of these people haven't been paying rates. So they are therefore not part of this COVID idea. So to me, what Diane and the Mayor's saying, they should be followed up. I mean, we have to have some sort of empathy, but if they've been rorting the system for a couple of years, to me, they don't come under that system. Sorry.
Yeah, totally agree. Yep. Well, yeah, that's what leaves a different message altogether then. Yep. Good to, Tony?
What I would like to clarify though, is that in relation to internal controls, I guess we're saying, do we have a policy and procedures? And we do. Do we follow those policies and procedures? Yes, we do. But in this particular instance, we made a conscious decision not to follow up those ratepayers or all ratepayers because of the pandemic. That was a decision that we took. Not because the controls weren't working, but we chose because of circumstances not to do that on a temporary basis. So that was, I think that's an important distinction to be made. And then secondly, in relation to the Mayor's request for indicating where the controls are, if you look at the controls in pages 9, 10 and 11, under the category called revenue, there's a section that deals specifically with rates. And it's all types of revenue, whether we're talking about grants or other revenue, but there is a section on rates there with a series of controls that are tested.
I appreciate there was a conscious decision, and I don't disagree with that, but it doesn't, an internal control says that that rates will be collected in a timely fashion, and you can't put a 5 when you're consciously not collecting rates. And you can put in the notes, COVID situation, extraordinary circumstance where conscious decision, and it acknowledges the lower score. It doesn't mean you've failed in your internal control, but it actually picks up why that, all those rates weren't collected. There was a conscious decision made because of COVID-19, and it's almost like an audit. We do that in health now. We actually have a code so that when we go back and audit 2020, we'll be able to pull out COVID-19. In every documentation, there's a COVID-19 reference. And it is because orders, clinical care changed deliberately as a result of COVID-19. So it's a way of auditing the impact of COVID on an organisation. It's just something that I picked up, because there's nothing wrong with not having a 5. It doesn't mean you failed, but
It just gives you the trail that it was a 5,
Yeah,
and it
and-
might have been a 5 in February, but come March and April, when a council's made a decision, which will then be recorded in your control track, this has happened, we have been told to just hold off for a while. So obviously we're not doing it as well as we would have in February. Let's come back to a 4, but guess what, in September, if this all stops and you've taken it off, it becomes a 5 again.
and you don't have to agree with me. You might have a completely different view that, no, we actually followed those internal controls. So I'm just making a comment of my interpretation of that.
Say, apart from that, these reviews are very helpful because you can pick up stuff that's not happening properly.
Oh, without a doubt.
And so that's good in that way.
Yep. Peter, anything from you in relation to, and just on that, about picking things up, I mean, I note in the last page, Tony, we talk about that action list, and things like the contract register, and I know that the external auditor is going to raise that as a point. I'm just wondering, why is it taking till December to set up a contracts register for council? You've got a document management system, so contracts is just saying we've raised a contract, and there's again, it should be procurement's role, that it's every time a contract's done, they record it, there'll be a number, there's the contract, and we keep a hard copy or electronic copy. That's the contracts register. I'll do that at my work. It's the most important, and it is just so good because whenever you need to go back and bring something back, it's there. So again, I don't know whether you're planning to use EDRMS, but I can't work out why it's taking till December for that action item to be closed off. Well,
through the chair, I think we've noted on page 9 that there is just a bit of a timing variation between when some of these schools were populated and the presentation of this report. For draw members to page 9 of 37, in terms of the contract register and contractor register, those registers have now since been completed, and we've noted that in the report.
is it?
The third paragraph from the bottom. But we've been able to facilitate that due to the slight change in the role, and as Nathan referred to in terms of splitting property and procurement, we've put more emphasis in the procurement space, which has sort of been able to facilitate the improvement in this area.
So again, so what I'm saying is if you look at the attachment, which is the Town of Gore task list, it says there it's a due date of, so to me, I would have thought that would have been closed off, completed, done. So that's, what is it? But I'm happy that it's done. That's what I'm glad. And the other one is this whole thing about this master file. Again, I can't understand why your system can't throw out a master file amendment to the system. And again, from the way I'm reading it here, it says the system generation has been part resumed on a monthly basis, investigating about our IT help desk and Civica to locate the full report generation. I mean, you know, when you change a master file on a supplier, and that's going to, again, that's going to be another one that Galpa is going to pick up and raise as a, you know, as a potential control breakdown and a weakness. So, and what was that one we got? That one is, well, that actually says to be done by 30th of June 2020. So has that been done? Do we know? Has anyone, Tony?
So in relation to the master files, you say, why aren't we able to obtain a report? The reason for that is it's a limitation of the software. We have had a running battle with the software providers for many years, trying to get various reports. This is one of them. And it has been raised. We've worked to resolve these issues. So it's not only the areas of accounts payable, it's in the areas of accounts receivable and rates. So we've done a lot of work in the rates area. We do have an audit trail report. It is now being run and it is being approved and saved in our electronic document system. The same applies to accounts receivable. In relation to the point that you're making in relation to accounts payable, is that there was a report which disappeared off of our menu. We're trying to find out where it went, but we haven't done that. In the interim, there's an alternate report which part way goes to resolving that issue, but it doesn't enable us to see all the master file changes. So we're working on that. So that's sort of the background of what we're trying to do there. Yes, we do take these improvements seriously. We do try and work to resolve these issues, but sometimes we have to work with the limitations that we come across.
Have you spoken to other councils that are using Civica to find out if they've got the same?
Yes, they have exactly the same problem.
Paramount control. Yep.
Yeah, I was just saying that years ago, these master file changes used to be fundamental payroll, rate changes, that sort of thing, procurement or accounts payables. They used to be very, very fundamental, but nowadays software suppliers, it's not just Civica, I think others are similar. And you just cannot get these reports, or you can get a report that dumps everything on you, not just the exceptional, you know, the exception stuff that you want to get to. So it is a bit of a problem, and I don't know why they find so much difficulty in providing that report, is because it's pretty fundamental.
Yeah. Thanks.
And that's a good point that you raised, Peter, because Paul and I were talking about this only today, and I was explaining to Paul that the master file in relation to rates only for June was 304 pages long. And the way it's documented is so poor that you almost can't make any sense out of what the report's trying to tell you. So that's a problem in itself. The other thing that I think is relevant to this discussion is that in relation to the improvement plan, not only do we have issues with our main accounting software, which is Civica Authority, but in the control track software itself, which is the specialist internal control software, that also has limitations. So in relation to the improvement plan, yes, we undertook this review over a period of 5 or 6 months. So we started in February and we finished pretty much close to the 30th of June. And so some of the comments that were made very early in the piece, and then we had to wait for different areas to be completed. I was aware when I wrote this report that some of the comments in relation to the improvement plans were not necessarily correct or up to date. I tried to fix them, but I couldn't. I couldn't go back into the system to change the commentary that was made. And we haven't had an opportunity to go back to the software developer and say, look, your system's not working properly. We needed to make some changes. And so, yes, some of the comments are a little bit out of date because we had completed some of the improvements. For example, the contracts register. Yes, we said that we would complete it by the 31st of December. That was the initial assessment. But the task, because we had the resources, we were actually able to do it by 30th of June. So it's now operational. But I couldn't actually, apart from putting it in the commentary in the report itself, I wasn't able to amend the improvement plan itself. So yes, there are some issues that we have and we're trying to work towards. So that's an example of what we're trying to do. It's an example of the conflicts that we have in the various areas.
Okay. Thanks, Tony. Paul, any comments from you before we close this agenda item?
Yes, I just thought it was interesting the fact that it was 200 different items that were reviewed. Good to see we're not taking, I'm a bit concerned about petty cat. There's a couple of little bits and pieces, but overall I think it's a pretty good report.
Okay, thank you. There's no further comments. We've got a recommendation that the 2019-20 Internal Controls Review report be received tonight. Thanks, Di. Seconded. Thanks, Paul. All in favour? Okay, carried. Thank you. Next item is the budget business plan, draft budget business plan and the long-term financial plan. Paul, over to you.
Thank you. Through the chair, the purpose of this report is obviously to table the updated draft 2021 budget for the committee's consideration, noting that the committee has had a previous discussion with regards to draft budget in around about February, March, if I recall, and this document now presented, which has been endorsed by council for the purposes of public consultation, has been developed on the basis of, started into the December last year, informed by 4 workshops, an audit committee and 4 council meetings. So the key proposal through the chair is for the committee to obviously consider the draft budget as presented, as endorsed by council for community consultation, and for the committee to actually give its own feedback that then will be informed, provided in the report that goes back to council at the 11th of August special council meeting. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to touch on what I saw as the key elements for the committee to reflect on, and starting with the operating result of $1.69 million. Now, naturally, that's a lot higher than what we were talking about 4 or 5 months ago, which was in the order of about $500,000. However, that has been informed solely by council's financial relief measures they wish to put in place relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in that regard, members, that's a combination of the rates relief proposal that council's considering in the order of $530,000, and also $615,000 of the proposed $2 million economic stimulus package that relates to projects that indicatively aren't of a capital works related nature. In relation to the proposed rate remissions, I think it's important to draw members to the fact that what we're proposing is, I wouldn't necessarily say unique, but there's only a very small number of councils that are are proposing it. As a sector, there's generally been quite a few councils that are now looking to adopt budgets with a 0% increase in their general rate revenue across the board. However, what council's doing, which I believe is appropriate in terms of providing financial relief to those who need it, and that's both businesses and individuals. The proposal encapsulated in the budget is a 2.4% increase in the base general rates across the board, obviously subject to individual valuation movements, but essentially the bottom line is a 2.4% increase, which, Mr. Chairman, relates to $530,000. And then councils, what we're proposing is that would then, those dollars would be utilised to provide rate remissions to those ratepayers who need it, both commercial and individuals, but provided on an application basis, subject to certain criteria being met. Now, the criteria to be met is outlined in the attachment, and from a commercial trader's perspective, that criteria has been developed in conjunction with the Gawler Business Development Group over a series of meetings. And so, the proposition that council is putting out for consultation is very much on a net 0% increase in general rate revenue from existing ratepayers. So there is that subtle key difference that the bottom line in terms of a net 0% increase is the same with a lot of other councils, is just how we get there. And so the council's been of the view, well, to recognising that from a financial perspective, COVID-19 has had there's been a wide range of impacts, both from the commercial sector and also the residential sector. Obviously, some, as has been well documented, there's been some amount of businesses that were forced to close their doors. Council members will recall back in April, we did have requests from the likes of a number of the hotels and I think the cinema, if I recall, seeking genuine rates relief. So what council, like a lot of other councils at that time, decided to do was give ratepayers the option to defer their rates. However, we have gone that one step further in the draft budget, where we're proposing to actually provide genuine rates relief up to 25% of general rates for those ratepayers who need it. And so to define those ratepayers who need it is essentially the criteria stipulates that for businesses, they would have had to have had a drop in profitability of greater than 30%, and also needing to be eligible for JobKeeper. And similarly for residential ratepayers, need to provide evidence, independent evidence that they've had a drop in their income greater than 30%. So again, I stress it is on a application basis, but nonetheless do believe it is providing genuine rates relief. We have also noted in the report and previous reports to council that there are some councils who have advertised that they're seeking to freeze their rate in the dollar, which is a totally different proposition. So a lot of councils are saying they'll freeze their revenue. However, there has been a few councils who've taken the alternate position, saying, coming out publicly, saying that they'll freeze their rate in the dollar, which in my view is that's all well and good. It's obviously up to each council to decide, but that does not provide any sort of rates relief in instances where valuations increase. Noting that for Town of Gawler, it's about 98, 99% of residential ratepayers will be experiencing a increase in their property valuation. So that's there's two schools of thought, but I'm of the view certainly that the view council's taken is appropriate. In relation, members, to the economic stimulus package, again, that's part of our sort of financial relief proposition, and there's a series of projects outlined in the attachment which are designed towards local employment / local supplier outcomes. And one of the centerpieces of that stimulus package is a grant scheme to local sporting clubs of $200,000 based on $40,000 being provided to each of our 4 major sporting precincts and the other $40,000 being provided across the other sporting clubs. So I think a lot of people, Mr. Chairman, recognise that sporting clubs have also been affected by COVID-19 with their seasons being delayed or shut down. And the clubs had previously come to council seeking assistance, which we've already provided by way of deferring or waiving lease and or licence fees, deferring community loan repayments. But I do think this is an important element that council's putting forward, whereby these sporting precincts would be able to apply for grants to do improvement works across those various precincts. As is also noted in the report, a number of the projects identified in the stimulus package will deliver tangible environmental outcomes and future cost savings. Members, in relation to the key financial indicators, again, touch on the fact that the operating deficit of 1.69 million, which is obviously a one-off, heavily driven by the COVID-19 financial measures. Our net financial liabilities ratio has been obviously affected by the COVID-19 response. As outlined in the report, the ratio result forecast or estimated to 30 June 2021 is in the order of 94%, which I know is marginally below council's policy threshold of 100%. So I'm of the view that certainly, yes, there will naturally be a financial short-term impact from the relief measures proposed, but nonetheless, I don't believe it's severely compromising our long-term financial plan. So, and I think it's important to note we've been able to provide this level of relief due to the diligence of the administration and council in our treasury management over a number of years. We've been able to reach a position where we have got the capacity to provide this relief, but noting obviously there will be sort of longer term consequences, but that's really just in relation to the timing of our next sort of major iconic asset project, which is the Carpathian Reserve. Also note, members, from the asset renewal funding ratio, it's important, I believe, that is not compromised, and it isn't in the estimates provided. We're still proposing to maintain that ratio at just over 100%. So we're not suddenly entertaining the notion that the financial relief measures will be provided by way of not doing sufficient reinvestment in our fixed assets. The last comment I want to make, members, was more broadly in relation to the impact on ratepayers, which will be very much part of the what we're communicating through the budget. As I touched on at the start, a 2.4% increase is the proposal incorporated in the budget, and for the average residential ratepayer would translate to an increase of approximately $39 or 75 cents per week. For a sole proprietor from a commercial setting, that 2.4% increase would be in the order of $25 to $50. For a small business operating, for example, with a handful of staff, a 2.4% increase, dependent on the property valuation, would be in the order of $50 to $150. And for a major business, such as a national supermarket chain, that 2.4% increase would translate to approximately $2,000. Members, I do more than that, certainly happy to take any questions. Certainly welcome feedback from the committee to inform the next report to council. But the final comment I wanted to make was in terms of the consultation that's commenced thus far. We've had a media release released in the first week, which was run by the local paper. I've done a video with the mayor last week, which has had quite a few views on social media. So we're certainly very much wanting to get the word out there. We have already had one submission received, and so any submissions received, Mr. Chairman, will be tabled to the council on the 11th of August. But also, just importantly, we want to table the feedback from this committee to that meeting as well. But certainly happy to answer any questions members may have.
Thank you, Paul. Open it up to the committee. Peter, anything from you first off?
Through you, Chair. I guess the questions I have really around I think it's actually pretty good budget overall, considering all the issues. However, I did have some concern about the rate remissions and the criteria for that. So, for example, with the commercial industrial ratepayers, they've got to demonstrate a 30% reduction for the 3-month period, April to June 2020, which was kind of at the peak of the problem. And we're now saying what problem at the moment, you know, in South Australia it's quite, I mean, it's still a problem, but it's not as bad as it was previously. So there's a question around the 30% drop in profitability compared to what? And I know that I think it's probably been taken from the JobKeeper criteria, which was also looking at a 30% drop from the previous
Same equivalent.
March quarter.
Yeah.
In which case, why wouldn't you just say, just if you're entitled to the JobKeeper, will you get this? That's one issue, but also what JobKeeper is going to change very soon. So they realise that they've opened up a bit of a can of worms, but and now they're going to, as I understand it, going to restrict access to JobKeeper and to certain people who got it and actually got a pay rise rather than a reduction. Things like that won't be able to carry on like that. So there's some, I guess, issues there in terms of how you manage that, or whether you accept that as being okay. But we're talking about the 2021 rates, not the 1920 year rates. So that was just one comment I had. The other comment I had was about the cost of this. So there's, I think, where did I read? It's about $580,000, was it originally for the? Yeah, 530. That's including the residential ratepayers. So how do we know that's the limit of it? Are we confident that's going to cover that, or are you going to find it's 750,000 or something down the track?
Yes, through the chair. Look, certainly a good question in that regard, Peter, that, that the $530,000, look, I'm relatively comfortable, certainly from a commercial perspective, with the discussions I've had with the Gawler Business Development Group, that I think arbitrarily between commercial and residential, roughly broadly speaking, sort of 50-50 split dollar terms. However, what I have been thinking in more recent times, and would appreciate the feedback from the committee, is that we have developed application forms based on the criteria that we've outlined. And as you rightly indicate, well, I can't sit here and now saying that the value of the applications that we receive is going to be under 530,000. So I guess to partly answer your question, Peter, what I've been thinking more recently is that we would have to have a closing date for the applications. And I think in previous reports we were suggesting end of October. And I'm thinking what the council could consider doing is certainly we'd be keen to get the message out there relative to this rate remission program, and would welcome applications which we would acknowledge at the time. But I think in terms of the dollars, and they're substantial, $530,000 is a sizable amount of dollars, and certainly recognise that. But I think in respect of providing a sufficient level of controls in terms of the value for emissions provided, I've sort of been increasingly of the view that if a person applied, we would, for the remission, we would, as I said before, acknowledge the application, but we would only make the determination of all applications immediately after the closing date, so that then we could get a full understanding of all the applications received and what this translates to potentially in dollar terms. And we have been clear in the report saying that the remissions would be in the order of up to 25% of their general rates. So I think in that regard, what it would then mean would I'd then be able to go to council and say, well, look, we've had a requests in the so many hundred requests, for example, and if you wish to apply a 25% general rate remission, for example, that would translate to $600,000, for example, just and that could then be a decision could then be made from council. Well, do they want to commit to that slightly higher value, or do we offer it on a pro rata basis such that it wouldn't be the full 25%, it might be marginally lower. So that's because until we get the applications, whilst I know I'm confident, relatively confident 530,000 would be around about the mark, but I can't guarantee that until I get all the applications. We've certainly got an indication from the Gawler Business Development Group relative to the likely number of traders that would apply, and as you can appreciate, a lot of them would be the likes of the hotels that had to close, and obviously the rates they're paying are substantially higher than residential rate payers. But I thought, just in terms of what you touched on, Peter, that was a thought process that had been turning in my mind, that rather than honouring each application straight away and then committing council potentially to more than the 530,000, a security mechanism for the council could be what I've just outlined, that yes, they would, those people who are still eligible would get a remission, but that would be considered once all applications have been received, so that council can provide the remissions on a fully informed basis, knowing that the full quantum of the applications received.
Just want to
So
be busy.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'm glad you're sort of turning your mind to that, because I think that's, there's a risk of that. The other area maybe is that circumstances may have changed. So during that 3-month period that is being referred to, things may have improved with some, like cafes, for example, might have had an uplift in their activity from that, and not quite such bad straits as they were. And may still be behind some difficulty, but it's not quite so bad. So maybe there's some consideration that maybe could be given to current circumstances as opposed to just those circumstances during that 3-month period. So,
because Peter, the other thing that they were finding out too is that when they realised that they had to go to their accountants to get this, that they would, as typical of accountants, were doing all the funny, postponing invoices and putting it all into the 1st of July.
Yeah, it's an industry.
Just holding everything back and saying, yeah, look, we've dropped our revenue, and they're still doing the work, but invoicing after that. So the question is, do you say we want that 3 quarters, but we also want the 1st quarter of this financial year? And as Peter said, we've seen a great improvement. Are you really in such, because from what I'm reading, the council wants to help those that are really in need. So that's where you're going to have to be able to pick up this and say, well, you have seen an upswing and a turnaround, so use that to pay your rates. Or can I also just ask, so that depreciation, the 500,000, that's not what we're putting through the books, is it? It's only coming on in the 3rd quarter. So what have we actually captured as the depreciation charge? You're not doing the full 500,000, are you? For Gawler, yeah.
Through the chair, the Gawler Link Road will also become a council-controlled owned asset on completion, which will happen over the next few months. And we've been continually indicating, based on the information available, that the depreciation would, on a per annum basis, would be in the order of $500,000. Now, I think for 2021, we've obviously discounted that a bit due to the few months early in the year that we won't have the road, but that depreciation has been allowed for in the 2021 budget.
The full 500.
Well, I think for 2021, 400,000 or just slightly over has been provided for, but in future years, the full 500.
And what would happen if that road doesn't come on at the time that, if it's not till December? Then obviously that your depreciation will go down for this budget. So, okay, so that's. Well.
Through the chair, yes, we would essentially, from an accounting perspective, have to commission the asset onto our books, essentially when it's available for use. So whether that be, obviously I can't say here and now what date that will specifically be, but we've been told by DIPTI the current message is in the 3rd quarter of 2020. So it would be any time this side of 30th September.
Well, has the mayor got it in the diary to cut the ribbon? That'll be the date. That's when we'll know. Okay. Any other questions? And look, as Peter said, I think it's a good budget given the situation and I think the council's tact, as Paul said, rather than going down the other path, you've gone down this path. I think it's a good financial strategy to do what you've done, and with a view of continuously helping the community and those that are really in need. So maybe just taking on board some of the questions that Peter's raised around the actual criterion And again, look, I think when people out there realise that, look, my fortunes have turned around since July, if you see that in there, you're asking them of that, they might not even put the application. It'll be less for you to go through and spend more time on those people that really want and need the money. So I don't know. Karen?
I've just got a question, Chair, because, you know, there is fears of a second wave. Hopefully South Australia doesn't get a second wave. But what is the capacity of the organisation looking at the budget figures if we were asked to do more? I mean, what are your thoughts on the risks around that?
Yeah, I feel that there's only so much councils can do in this area. It's really the realm of the federal government in particular to provide more extended job keeper or job seeker relief, rather than the council trying to get into that social support activity. I don't think that's really where council's role in the scheme of things really is, in my view. And it's a bit of a slippery slope to be doing that, because there could be anything else coming up in the future that might set a precedent for. I think in this circumstances, what council's done and what council's generally done is respond, because the pandemic was just immediate and very frightening, and there was like a cliff and we were going to fall off it. Something needed to be done, and everybody sort of stepped up to try and provide appropriate support and keep morale up, I suppose. But having said that, I think now, particularly in South Australia, I think it's probably more time for more of a level-headed approach. I would think.
Yeah, Karen, well, look, again, I think council can only do that much. And I think it goes to the point that Paul and me had a discussion a few weeks before this meeting. Again, it's all about the long-term financial plan as well. I mean, if you can do so many things and for the immediacy, but then down the track, you won't be getting your results of what you're trying to aspire to. And again, when you're looking at the way the long-term financial plan, I think, what is it? It's in about 4 years' time, it gets back into that surplus position again, isn't it? You try and do a bit too much more, well, then you'll be just having deficit, up to year 10, and then you don't want to, borrow for the operating expenses, capital, fair enough. So yes, I think the tact is, and again, maybe a bit more pressure on both federal and state governments that they should be using the funding to try and prop up, so, right.
Yeah, I'd like to acknowledge the work done by the Finance Department and the exec team. I think it's been great. It must have been one of the hardest budgets ever, I think, to have formulated. And I'm proud that we can offer businesses and residents some relief if needed. Obviously, has set us back some years with our long-term financial aspirations, but so important to make sure that we still have businesses operating. Also aware that this may not be over. Yeah. All right.
And Paul, will that 1.69 now change with our earlier comment about trying to put with the internal audit? So that might tweak that a bit as well. If we decide to put an amount as part of the budget bit for the internal audit, so that number will change as well, isn't it? Yep. Okay. Paul, sorry, Paul's got his hand waving. Sorry,
yeah,
Paul.
That's fine. I just wanted to, I thought to start with, there was a good information in the report about gifting, and people really need to understand how the state and federal government sort of put services onto councils and don't resource them properly, and then ultimately that our ratepayers can pay more, etc. And I also agree that there's a limit to what we can do. I mean, we've done a lot already. We have responded quickly. I'm just concerned around the idea that we might want to borrow money for operations, for example. I think that's a really slippery slope to go down, and I'm concerned with long-term financial viability or sustainability of our council if we start doing those things. So I think if that message can be hammered home, I think that would be a good message. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, look, through the chair, I'm of the view if someone was to ask me, well, what can we further provide if need be, I'd sort of caution that optimism, because I think what we're proposing already goes well above what virtually every other council is proposing, and the message certainly has been in terms of one-off rate rebates, and as you'll see, there has been sort of subtle consequences on the long-term financial plan by way of pushing out the return date to surplus by a nominal, I think, couple of years, and also increasing our liabilities ratio, getting to close to that threshold. And I think that threshold is there for a reason. It's a widely accepted threshold of 100% for our liabilities ratio. And I do think your council does have to have a bit of a buffer with that ratio for any unforeseen events. And so I think in terms of the rate remissions, I wouldn't really be wanting to sort of advocate going any further, because I really don't think we've got the financial capacity to really stretch it much further at all.
So the only other thing that I'd say though, and hopefully there isn't a second wave or whatever further with this COVID, maybe the other area that you would as a council look at is actually your service delivery. Is how often, how much, at what level? Is it still the gold-plated service delivery? Are you going to bring it back? Because that has to be done. And when you do that in your home, you do that for your own personal. If you knew you were in a situation yourself, I've got to pay back, and I think the community would expect that. So that could be an area that you might need to look at. Exactly, that's right.
Chair, in New South Wales, some councils were facing bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Things were that bad, are that bad. And I'd argue rate capping has a lot to do with that.
One final comment. I think it's also important, Peter, I think you touched on it earlier, that in terms of the total tax take across the 3 tiers, we collect 4%. And so the heavy lifting has to be done at a national and to a lesser degree state level. But nonetheless, members may be aware, there has been the push at the state level for local government to be doing more. And I think what we're doing here is our own heavy lifting at a local level. But yeah, I think it's just important to bear in mind that the LGA has recognised this from an industry perspective. There's only so much councils can do. And generally the LGA message has been twofold, which is exactly what we're doing, is providing rates relief to those who need it, and sort of stimulus projects to sort of kickstart the economy. But anything above that, I would argue, has to be done nationally or at a state level.
I think just taking Paul's comment, I think it's so important for this budget going in is the actual messaging, and the communication strategy has to be so good. And again, whether, we talk about being part of the whole LGA, because, the LGA must have some way of them bringing it all together and showing how the different councils have been able to do different things to suit the community needs. They've got a role to play in that as well. So when you're getting the same messages coming out from different areas, I think that's going to be so important in this next month or so. So if there's no further, so well done, yes, Paul, and I'll take Di's comment to you and your team and to the executive for bringing this all together. So congratulations on that. So well done. And we've got a 5-part recommendation here. thanks. And you've captured some of the audit committee notes, yep?
Through the chair.
Sorry.
There's two options for the committee to consider in terms of with recommendation 5, whether you wanted to consider specific resolutions in this regard, or whether you're happy for us to summarise the feedback in the report going to council. I just wanted to provide that option to the committee.
The audit committee notes or staff collate the feedback from the audit committee at this meeting to be
Included in the final.
to be incorporated in overall feedback as part of consultation or something like that, Paul. That must sound about right.
Yep.
That staff collate the feedback as discussed from the audit committee on the draft budget. Oh, you've got that regarding the draft budget and annual review of the long-term financial plan. And this feedback be incorporated or be included as part of submissions.
Maybe things you want to do before you get to submissions and public, because certainly some things I was talking about in relation to the criteria for applying for
That should be included.
the remission. You probably need to sort of sort that out before you make public. For example, Paul made the comment about phrasing it in a way that the remission will be up to 25%, dependent on to a maximum value. You've done that already. Oh, has it? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, just wasn't in the criteria.
Staff collate the feedback as discussed regarding the draft. And this to be reported to a future council meeting, maybe then being included as part of a submission. And this feedback be reported to it'd be part of a report to a future council meeting. How about that?
Yep.
So you collate the feedback. You will,
Just bear in mind there that the recommendation 6.
oh, okay. As discussed. Okay, well, we can get rid of that. Sorry, Kate.
So just finish it with long-term financial plan. So 5 finishes at long-term.
Because 6
financial
incorporates when it'll come back to council. Sorry,
So-
Kate.
So,
Oh, no,
no, keep 5
No, only, and this feedback be part of a report to a future council meeting.
because that's number 6.
That's it.
Yep. Full stop. Yep. Excellent.
Yep. So
Well done. Okay, so thanks. So Paul, you've moved that. Someone has seconded. Thanks, Karen. All in favour? Okay, carried. Thank you. Okay, policies review.
yeah, good question. May I ask a
Yep. Is that policies review?
policy review?
Yep.
Yeah, just on the service level, I'm looking at the policies and then I'm looking at the service level. And it doesn't, the service level as described in our attachments or some of the, for example, preventative health services, the service level is really what's been done in the last 12 months. It's not necessarily service level. It's just the tasks that have been completed. So That's not a service level. That's just an overview of what's happened. I thought we were going to get a service level. Sorry? Well, my question is, my understanding was that we would get a service level, like what is the service level that we are approving? I don't believe that the tables are reflecting a service level, they're reflecting 12-month activity.
Activity, yeah, that's right.
And so I feel reluctant to approve a service level policy when in fact it's a 12-month overview of activity. That's not a service level.
Well,
Service level is what standard you reach.
It's in there though. So if you look at that first one, so if you look at the parking control, it says the monitoring daily, parking as required, expiation notices daily. So that's the service level they're talking about that for.
Okay, so.
Is it the same for the others?
Yep. Well, if you look at.
Preventative health services.
Yeah, health services. Where does
So they've got
health
program
services?
food audits, approximately 12 audits per annum. Undertake program food inspections, approximately 200 premises inspected per annum.
Yeah, but that's how much happened in the last 12 months. That's not a service level, in my view. It's just,
that what they're meant to be
that's
done
actually
annually,
what
or is that
happened in the
what was
last
done?
12 months.
Through the chair, Chair, you touched on exactly what, with the attachments to each, the final column there, level of service, is for the various activities undertaken, indicates the level of service undertaken. Now, what we've endeavoured to do is for each of those activities, where appropriate, is provide either supplementary graphs. So, for example, with preventative health services, got the supplementary graphs for the number of food inspections and food audits to sort of help inform that service level. So those graphs are provided merely for sort of supplementary information, and that the actual level of service is outlined in the against the various bullet points in that table attached to the policy. That's
Well, if I may, the service level for preventative health services, the level of service for the various preventative health activities is disclosed in Appendix 1, which is the table. So, no, it doesn't say that in the policy. You get referred from the policy to the table, and the table gives you 12-month activity. Yeah.
So how would you do a level of service for that's?
Well, your service, what's the level of service that you want? Is it, what's the target? What's the aspirational target? How often should you be cleaning? How often should you be inspecting your swimming pools, for example? So for swimming pools, it says inspection every 3 to 4 months. Is that adequate? Probably is. But then it says undertake programmed food audits, approximately 12 audits per annum. Now that's dropped. We used to do a lot more than that. It's gone down by about a quarter, more than 3/4, I think. So I'm not getting a sense of what the service level should be. I'm just getting told what we do, and that fits the service level.
I agree. So
It's not the service level, in my view.
Well, then we need whichever branch or department within council does this, have to go out and say benchmark it with other councils. Say, so what do you do for your food inspections? Are you doing 50 per annum? I don't know either.
Well, I don't feel comfortable in approving, I'm sorry, of this, because I don't feel I'm getting a service level. Now, other people might have a different view, but, you know, it's not telling me what the service level should be, what I feel comfortable. I don't know if 12 audits is enough a year, or is it too many?
No, to me, Karen, I think the council is telling us what they think it should be, but I think what we're saying is what is an expected level of service for that type of activity? You know, is it legislatively driven? So what if the food inspection says you have to do it 50 times a year, but you've selected to do a service level of 20? I don't know. So that's.
my view is I'd just like some more information around understanding that this service level is at an adequate level, rather than just 12, for example, 12 audits a year for food audits. Yeah, is that an efficiency measure, or is it just what we do? And that's just what we do. So my view is I think I'd like some more information, because if we come back and say we need to change these service levels, on what basis do we do that? Or do we just cut them? Because we have to. We should always keep them under review, but to be able to keep them under review, I think I personally need some more information around what constitutes an adequate level of service, for example, preventative health services. So if you look at the graph on food audits, it's gone from 78 in 2014-15 to 11 in 18-19. So I know that is telling me something. Is it telling me that it's more efficient, or is it telling me that they can only do 11? Or don't we need to do it? I don't know.
Through the chair, just in relation to, just to clarify, I think we've referenced it in the report, with regards to the number of food audits, the reason that has come down quite dramatically is around about 2015-16 from memory, we ceased doing food audits outside the council boundary. So since that time, the audits have been done solely relate to food premises within the town of Gawler. So that's the key reason for that drop.
Yes. Diane?
Good question. What's the difference between a food audit and a food inspection?
I think one's more detailed. I think an inspection, from what I can see, they spend 2 to 3 hours. They just go and then have a look. Whereas in an audit, there'll be procedures, they'll document, they'll take. That's what my understanding from an audit is compared to an inspection. So that's why there's a lot more inspections. You can go in there and do it very quickly compared to a more detailed audit. You've got to cover all the work, health, safety, hygiene, all the other bits and pieces. So, sorry, Paul.
My club was audited this year, which I think we're one of those 11 or something, because they came in and checked everything over a couple of hours.
Yep.
So there is a difference between audit and food inspection. I can see where the mayor's coming from. We haven't got a set standard of how many people are in that time.
Yep.
Now, I must admit, that is the first time we've been checked in 3 years. And we passed the audit, so I don't know what the standard is. So
Yep.
I'd like to know what the standard is myself.
Yep.
We spent 18 years in the hotel here in Gawler and never had one inspection ever.
Lucky you. Yep. So, but can I go back to, I think, Peter's original comment about whether this is actually policy worthiness, or do you actually have an overarching service level policy that says, and we've got service in these areas, and let's have that more as a, as a procedure or some directive that's an operational issue rather than a policy. So, no, correct. So what I'm saying is leave that Appendix 1 for Henry and his team to manage, whereas if you have an overall policy position, you'd say that we will meet an expected standard, whether it's health inspection, whether it's parking inspection, we will meet the community expectation or the standard. That's a policy directive that you then give the CEO and his team to go and actually operationalize it with these tables that we don't need to see in a policy. You're setting general directions. Because again, I've never seen these in other councils that I've. Yep. Yep. Correct. Yep.
Just hearing the conversation, obviously we need to go back and do some further work in respect to what are the service levels, what is a policy, and then what are the standards expected. And it's, I think, from the perspective of the community, well, what does the community, what does council think is a reasonable service delivery outcome? And it may well be that we need to look at, well, what are we measuring in terms of the level of service that is both qualitative or quantitative? And it might be what seems to be, only one indicator, generally speaking, per service delivery. I think that's probably too simplistic, where it needs to be, we might need to look at quality, quantity, cost and time as a variable relative to each of the service areas, but then enshrine that within the policy. Whether we have an overarching policy on service delivery of all these characteristics, I think that might be, a little bit too generic. I think it might be more helpful operationally if we can break it down. Okay. It might be a bit repetitive, but invariably people are interested in certain particular policy areas and certain particular service delivery areas. So I think it's probably how we measure it and how we articulate it as a policy, as compared to a table with it, which is just saying, well, this is what we do.
Perspective, if you look at preventative health services or food inspection or a kitchen inspection and food preparation, community expectation is that risks will be minimised. Salmonella, the incident, let's look at salmonella, will be minimised due to oversight and management of kitchens and preparation and delivery of food. So that's sort of, council has a role in preventing that, minimising that, maybe not preventing it, but minimising that through regulation and oversight. So what does that look like?
And I think, Henry, also from the early comment around the budget, where we're talking about if this is a service level, maybe even somewhere within the policy that these levels will change depending on the circumstances as well. So, while you might want to say, yeah, we're going to do 20 a year, but, COVID keeps going, we've got to look at where we're going to cut, we're going to bring that back to, and it's all risk related as well. So I think if you can build that into those policy statements, it'll be good. Okay, so we'll hold these over, Paul. A good discussion, I think. It's good. Okay. Okay, draft audit committee work plan. Progress report.
Just on risk management, I know we had a presentation by the engineering department. Are we having more presentations from different managers in regard to how they're assessing their risk?
Through the chair, if I could. Yes, that's the intention. I think we'll have one of the other managers come along to the next audit committee meeting and then get into a bit more of a regular program thereafter, so that hopefully by the end of the calendar year, the committee has heard from, if not most, all of the executive team.
Thanks, Henry. That's good. Okay, any other comments or changes? So that plan is now done, isn't it, Paul? We're into the new 2021. So that plan and all those activities that we did in 1920 will go to developing the audit committee report for the annual report that goes up. All those activities. So I think they're all pretty well captured from all the agendas we've had. Okay, so Paul, any questions from you? No, okay, thank you. So recommendation that we note the 1920 audit committee. Thanks, Karen and Diane, sorry. All in favour? Okay, carried. And then we go into the new plan, which is for the 2021 year. Where was this? Again, I note, no, that's internal audit. Did we have our annual review of? So I think if you look in our review, the performance review of our. Yeah, well, I think that's the standard practice for most of the other committees that I've seen on, so we can get that happening. And I think also, given that by the end of this year will be the first year that we've got the new committee members in, and get some feedback from them as to how we're performing as a committee. Paul, do we bring anything back from insurance as to how the insurance, is that?
Yes, well, that's sort of broadly through the review of the initial liability scheme. Section 1. So we get an annual report from them.
But is that something that you, again, I know with other councils, they actually present their, when they go to the LGR and actually do their annual insurance program as to what the new policies they're taking on, but again, I'll leave that up to council and the CEO, whether he wants that type of information brought through this committee to review, because insurance is all risk-based as well. It's about how much insurance do you take relative to the risk you're willing to manage and controls you put in place. So, it'll be all your fleet insurance and all the different areas and the different categories. I mean, I've seen that in other committees that come through and we have a review. And so again, that's just food for thought.
I think we're very much in that transition phase of this committee from what's been traditionally more a financial focus to now, and a broader organisational whole of risk perspective. So it's another suggestion, and if that's what you're experiencing in other committees around the place and other councils, and that's certainly the direction of the legislation that we're going to. So more than happy for the administration to prepare reports accordingly.
Okay. Thanks, Henry. Okay, no further questions. We've got a recommendation that this work plan for 2021 be noted. So thanks, Di. Seconded, Paul. All in favour? Okay, carried. Okay, 6.7, the Statutes Amendment Bill.
Through the chair, the reason we're presenting this to you tonight is if the legislation gets passed, there is obviously implications for council in terms of the audit committee. in itself, but there's obviously far wider measures than that, particularly being the, as you'd all be aware, in terms of the proposal of rate capping, which is under the guise of proposed amendments to section 123 of the Act, which, Mr. Chairman, I attended a couple of LGA meetings, Zoom meetings last week on the proposed legislation, and certainly the proposed changes to section 123 in relation to the budget business plan was a key topic of conversation, and what the bill as tabled references is that the key change from a budget perspective is that council would be, as I see it, essentially having to really complete its budget well before 31st of December, which, to be brutally honest, I just can't see how the hell that would, on what planet would ever be able to achieve that. Because to do that, we'd have to be starting the conversations that we've had over the last sort of 6 months. We'd really be having to start that essentially now, before we've even finished the financial statements of the year before. Because I don't think it's really fair that the council could advise the body, which is, as I understand it, deemed to be potentially a SCOSA, that would have to report to a SCOSA by the end of December, essentially saying what our sort of rates proposition was for the next financial year. Well, I'd be of the view, well, you can't really inform that position until you've considered your whole budget in its entirety. To do otherwise, I think would be foolish. And also, in that regard, you need to be considering, well, what's the budget bids proposition for that next year? So I see, massive issues in that regard, not just from obviously the timing perspective, but the administrative burden on staff in terms of compliance, because as is outlined in the draft legislation, we would need to be reporting to that independent body by the end of September. They would then need to let us know by the end of March what they think of our proposal. And yeah, I just see that is the key point of reference that I think the industry across the board is certainly not supportive of, because it just takes the management of the budget essentially outside of the control of council at a local level. In saying that, obviously, consistent with the LGA, as we've tabled in the suggested comments, that there are some proposed amendments that are naturally welcomed, but the key part of the legislation certainly relates to the budget, also implications for the audit committee now being called Audit and Risk Committee. Interestingly, note that each council would be mandated to change its audit firm every 5 years. And again, from an audit committee perspective, I sought clarity from the LGA in relation to, as you're aware, the minutes of each meeting, of each audit committee meeting get presented to council. The clarity I sought in relation to the draft legislation was, it was referencing that we would not only have to provide the minutes of the audit committee to each meeting, to each council meeting, but would have to provide a quarterly report. As you're aware, we do an annual report to council of the committee's activities. The draft legislation is proposing that would now need to be done quarterly. And I think it's safe to say, members, in various elements of the draft legislation, the devil is in the detail, and that detail we don't know yet because the regulations haven't been drafted. So it's easy to make a sort of a general broad brush comment, well, in principle support, for example, but until you actually know what the regulations prescribe, it's very hard, nigh impossible to provide a informed position. Nonetheless, we are seeking feedback from the committee tonight to inform a report to go to council at the July meeting, following which it's the intent to, from a Town of Gawler perspective, to lodge a submission with the LGA from the Town of Gawler, I think by the 9th of August, I believe is the date. So happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Paul. Karen?
Yeah, I read the 200 odd amendments. Most of them aren't too bad, to be honest. The budget is just not realistic. I completely agree with Mr. Horwood. It's just not doable. And it also takes, doesn't just take the budget away from council, it takes it away from communities. And I think that's a really key point, that it goes to, if it is going to be a SCOSA, it'll be a SCOSA, or the minister who's sitting behind SCOSA, all the power, and we'll have to comply. We won't have a choice. So it doesn't matter whether your community likes your budget or not. It doesn't matter. So I think that's wrong. And I think we should oppose that quite strongly. With the audit and risk committees, I'm on the LGA audit committee, and we meet nearly every month, and there's a report that goes to every board meeting, a little overview. It's just notes. It's not a full scale, in-depth, but it just highlights of what was discussed and key points, and it's really helpful. And I wonder whether, if it's a quarterly report, that, because if it comes in that elected members aren't on audit committees, which I think we should stay on audit committees. I think it's a really good way of bringing the council into the audit committee and vice versa, and you get might be new but older and experienced, but you know, you might be fresh on council, I might be fresh on council. You go on audit committee, you learn so much. I think it's a really good exercise for all elected members. So I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to make the audit committee pretty much independent, and I don't disagree with that, but I worry that it becomes so independent we lose touch with it. So I don't necessarily support reducing the elected members. I think there still needs to be good balance there, because I think that it really helps us understand the role of the audit committee, and it will expand with risk. So I don't support reducing the elected members. I don't think we should have all elected members. I think we should, you know, we don't know how many. I didn't actually say that I could see. It just said reduce the amount of elected members and increase independent members. So I don't...
So I think, Karen, I think they're the ones where I think where they're seeing some councils where you've got a 5-member committee, you've got 1 independent, you've got 4.
Yeah.
You know, so I think they're saying we need to get that balance.
Get that balance.
So, and again, even with numbers, if Gawler decides to have a 6-member audit committee, that's their terms of reference. 3 council, 3 independent. That's your call. I think they just
so
want
I
to
like
do
the balance.
minimum of 5. Is it?
Because some regional councils won't be able to get to that, will they?
No. Well, they're talking about actually having regional audit committees, so they actually represent a whole swathe of regional councils, because they can't get the right, so they'll go and sit on different, you know, so they'll be the same committee, but just going and 3 or 4 meetings in 1 week.
And so, some regions would need that because they just haven't got the volume of people, but I think what we have here works, and I'd be loath to change it, frankly. I like the balance. I think you're right, you need enough independent members, but you also need at least 2 or 3. I think 3 is a good number. 4, I think it works with us. I think we should stipulate that we like that balance of even at least split half and half. If there's 4, you have 2 each. If there's 6, you have 3 each, or whatever it is. Yeah. Yeah, well, there's some good stuff, like the conflict of interest is it's a much better improvement.
Well, you can see those 4 key areas that they're trying to make the changes to. And some really good stuff. And
I'm keen around your thoughts around the budget. I think what Paul said is absolutely right.
no,
There's just no way we can.
Again, and I think this is driven out of a, state government mentality where they've got, so many resources to do their budget planning. And I mean, it goes from there to a treasury area to overlook at the whole state budget. Well, you don't have that luxury here. That's the difference. So, and again, the timing part that Paul alludes to, you're right. I mean, how can you start your budgeting before you've actually finished your prior year's financials? There's year-end adjustments. There's all these different things that happen. So,
Alterations sort of make me think they're trying to make councils a committee of the government rather than being independent. They just want us to be a committee of their government. So.
Karen, the only one that sorry, Peter, you go. The one that I was looking at is the one around the Auditor Generals doing the audits. The way I read it, they're saying if they decide, so we've got Galpins, if they decide in year 3, no, we're going to come and do the audit, they'll do it. Galpins don't have to do it that year, so they'll actually do the full financial statements. They'll do it exactly as it is. But from what I know in other councils in the last 3 to 4 years where they've gone in and done all their reviews, they don't charge you a cent. Well, and that's again, the devil in the detail. Are they going to charge you back? If they are, I'd say no, because I know how expensive Auditor General audits are when I was with PIRSA. They are exorbitant. Correct. So that will be the question. But what I'm saying is I know when they've done those governance reviews, when they've done those one-off special reviews, they've gone into these different councils, produced a full-on report, handed to them, and just left it there. And there was no charge from what I understand. Well, find out. Yep.
Through the chair, this was one question I did actually put to the LGA because I was of the view that there was, and as we've put in the comments and the advice provided at the meeting was there is a risk, albeit I'd suggest nominal risk, that a council could actually be paying for 2 external audits in the 1 year, one from the Auditor General and one from their own auditor. And also turn my mind to the fact, well, if for whatever reason the Auditor General decided to come in and do the audit in, say, year 3 of a 5-year audit term with our own auditors, what recompense do our own auditors have from council, given they've got a contract agreement for that 5-year term? So I don't know necessarily what the answer is there, but they did acknowledge it does potentially expose additional cost to the council, and they were of the view that clearly any audits by the Auditor General would be done cost recovery.
Right. And I know that when they do, even now with some of the smaller state government departments and agencies and the smaller subsidiaries, they actually do use their external audit firms anyway, like Bentley's and Galpins, to go and do their audits. So, I don't know. Peter, you wanted to raise a couple of...
I don't actually know where to start, to be honest. I mean, I haven't looked at the whole thing that, the conflicts of interest and all of that sort of thing. I've really looked at the financial component of it, which I guess is more relevant to this committee. And I agree pretty much with all the comments that staff have responded to based on the LGA reporting as well. To me, just as a general comment, this just seems so ill-informed about local government. It's not been done on the basis of any research report, and those reviews that have been done none of this has actually been taken from those past reviews. It's really, as has been mentioned, it's taking away the proper role of local government and making it a state manipulated body, effectively, with no accountability. Councils are elected by the community. There's a whole lot of controls and risks management and all the rest of it being put in place. A lot of that has been, needed, and that's been good. But that's fairly recent that those things have come into being, and they're working. So to have this sort of control, really, of the rate setting process, it seems to me, by the state government, which is not actually accountable for providing the services, is just a nonsense, in my view. So apart from where, just on maybe on the audit committee that was raised, I agree. I think whether there's additional independent membership included, I'm not fussed. Some councils just have one independent member, and I think that's probably too little. I think you need a bit of diversity of opinion. 2 is better. You might want to go to 3, but you wouldn't want to withdraw the elected member representation, because the whole purpose of the audit committee with those independent members is to transfer information back up the line so that those independents don't sit on the council. You need that, and you can't always put it all in a minute. So it needs somebody to convey the behind the scenes rationale, I suppose. So I think that's for discussion. The Auditor General, that's been around for a long time. In my view, I don't see the benefit of it. Some people do. It worked quite well in Queensland, but the Queensland Auditor General managed the thing on an outsourced basis, so they would employ Pricewaterhouse or KPMG or whatever to do the actual audits, but they would oversee and manage those audits. And the councils there paid a very high cost for that entire service. I mean, for something that costs $25,000 here, you're probably talking about $80,000 and any experience that I've had with the Audit General is that it's very expensive, and I think you've alluded to that as well, and not necessarily any better. In terms of the business plan and rating provisions, I think that to some extent is being covered by the Local Government Association and staff responses, which I agree with. The only area that I would suggest may need some more testing is this concept of growth. They talk about defining growth as only being additional properties as an extra number. I don't quite understand what they're doing, but they're suggesting that if someone puts an extension to their factory or a large extension to their house, that is not, should not be considered growth. In other words, they would still pay more rates, but you wouldn't be able to capture that rates as an additional revenue to the council to provide more services or reduce debt. You lose your power under the proposal to spend that money in other ways which may be relevant to the community. You're forced to roll that back into reducing the rates to the existing rate payers by that growth. And you can get around it by increasing your rates beyond the CPI or whatever, is trying to constrain it. but then you've got to go through hoops to try and do that. And that seems to me very, very cumbersome, very inefficient way of running a government or any organisation. So I think the definition of growth needs to be looked at holistic. I actually think that there needs to be, if it was me, I would be pushing back on these changes and saying there needs to be a properly researched paper about what is the best way for government, for local governments to base their rating systems. Because the way they're talking about it is very uneducated, I think, and not based on any science, if you like, relating to COVID. They didn't really say this, though. And none of this came out of that. They said a lot of things about efficiency of, governments and things. Yeah, I don't. Yeah. Well, I may be wrong, but I didn't think they had covered that that's level of detail. I don't know if you know, Henry. Do you any idea? No. But that question about what constitutes growth and so on is quite an important distinction for this decision-making process. And to me, it needs to be actually worked out, not just based on somebody's opinion or a political agenda or whatever it needs to be. Yeah, you just got to go through hoops. Yeah. Yeah.
Whether in fact this is the consequence of the influence of the property council, where in the inner metro areas, they are increasingly, go for apartment developments, is, when you have one property that you redevelop and then have multiple apartments, but are not defined as additional properties, then that then has an influence on the rateability from council. Now that might be an influencing factor here. So, the property council and the UDIA, they're involved in all sorts of machinations and influences with the state government, and that's probably an element of that. Yeah. And I mean that in a very constructive way.
Yeah.
The issue of SCOSA being the body that the issue of SCOSA being you're suggesting that SCOSA is the body that might have to do this, apart from for God's sake, having it finished by Christmas and then them having 3 months to make a decision about it is just ludicrous. And a SCOSA is there to review monopoly power organisations like SA Water and electricity providers and so on, to make sure they don't exert their monopoly power in their pricing, and they base it on the return on assets and things like that. That's not a formula you can apply to council services, which are a multiple in diversity, and don't have necessarily a single formula that you can actually apply to the way it's priced or taxed, because this is tax, not a price, whereas the SCOSA is actually defining things by way of a price, effectively, of water or electricity. So it's a completely different thing, and I can imagine that they would feel totally at sea in trying to define how they were going to respond to this request to review things.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, Peter, because apparently they've done it for this year just gone by, and they've come up with a number saying that, you know, that was in the press. They just said they've done their review, and have come up with saying, well, you know, there could have been savings in rates and whatever. How? Let's have a look. Let's have a look at your science and your methodology, and let's challenge it. But that'll never come out.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah.
I don't usually read the advertisers, so I probably don't know what's going on. The other thing is, one of the things I haven't dealt with here is differential rates, as far as I can see. And that's another whole issue of... No, it hasn't come up. But, I mean, you know, there's a whole lot of things that could be discussed. Anyway...
They have changed from site value to full pay.
Yeah, that was a good idea. Yeah, but the timing issues that Paul's alluded to just make this very, very difficult. And, you know, in terms of trying to save money, make things more efficient, it's adding cost and making things more inefficient, in my view. Are they?
If what the minister said the other day, that wasn't the intention of the changes to the to the annual business plan. So I think if we keep advocating and put some strong feedback back in, I think it'll really help the advocacy around, because that's just not doable, is it?
Okay. Any further discussions? So Paul, have you captured enough, you think, to put back in your, because we've got the two-part recommendation, that we made the changes and that you'll capture the feedback to present back to council on the 28th of July. Move, thanks, Paul. Seconded, Karen. All in favour? Okay, thanks. Our last report is the debtors analysis. Over to you.
Thank you. Through the chair, obviously this is just the current report that we provide to the committee on a half-yearly basis. As was discussed earlier in the meeting, and is outlined in table 1 on page 33, we recognise that there has been a considerable increase in the value of outstanding rate debtors as a sort of consequence of COVID-19. And I think, as we've acknowledged in the report, obviously during the current financial year, we'll need to turn our attention to that. And we've also acknowledged in the report the number of people who have made deferral applications, and also acknowledge the nearly 20% increase in the quantum of ratepayers who are now on payment arrangements compared to 2018-19 to current. And we've also provided on table 2 the standard summary relative to the sundry debtors, which is obviously debtors, other debtors outside of rates. But happy to answer any questions members may have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Any questions from the committee members? Nothing from you, Paul, from home? No, okay. So we've got a recommendation that the data analysis report 30th of June be noted. Thanks, Paul and Diane. All in favour? Okay, carried. Thank you. So we've got items listed for discussion. We've got nil items for future meetings. I think we've got that captured pretty well in our work plan. Questions without notice, nil. Motions without notice, nil. Close the meeting. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Thank you, Paul.